这样的吗？这是二次函数吗？
嗯，
对啊，它的后面也抛物线，不是抛物线，人家都说了，每天销量有点这个函数关系是这样的，已经是直线了，怎么是抛物线呢？不是，我说它跟那个利润关系是抛物线。哦，多少元每天课？
Hello everyone, welcome back to day 8 of the chess camp. So I'll quickly recap what we will be going through today. Hopefully you saw on the slide. So firstly, similar to yesterday, we'll review the tactic we learned yesterday, which is the fork. And then afterwards, we will move on to our third tactic for the week, which is the skewer. So I'll discuss what is a skewer, and then there's two types of skewers. So we'll look at that. And then we'll look at some examples, and then we will look at some practice, which we'll do in breakout rooms. So I'll quickly share my screen. We'll go through some quick review on the fork. Okay, so this is black to move. So,
knight to c3.
Great try. Knight to c3. It does attack the queen from c3. The knight does attack the queen on b5, but that only attacks one piece, and usually in a fork, we're trying to attack two pieces at the same time. And when the knight is on c3, it's only attacking the queen, and white has a lot of choices there. White can trade queens if they want to. So knight c3 isn't the best move, but that's a great try.
Queen c3?
Sorry?
Queen c3?
Yep, queen c3 is correct. Well done. Oh, wait, sorry, never mind. Queen c3, queen c3, it does look like a fork, but the queen is actually pinned. My bad, I forgot about that. So that isn't the best move. Okay, I'll give a hint. So currently, as was suggested, knight c3 does attack the queen, but the queen can obviously move. So is there a way we can force another piece to a square where the knight on c3 would be attacking the piece?
Rook to E3.
Rook to e3, so this square?
Yes.
The rook can't get to the e3 square, although that's a great try.
D4. Rook to D4.
Rook d4 is another great try. Only issue is that square is protected by the bishop as well as the knight, so that would end up losing a rook. Okay, I'll review the answer in a minute. So the hint I gave earlier.
How about knight to g3?
Knight g3 is another good try. It does attack the rook in the corner on h1. Only issue is similar to knight c3 right now, it only attacks one piece. So the piece can simply go to h2, for example, if we play knight to g3. So the hint I gave earlier is knight c. Yep, go ahead.
Queen to c5?
Queen to c5, the queen is still pinned, so the queen can't actually go to c5.
The soldier go to G4.
It can go to g5, but it can't go to g4. Pawn to g5. It's an interesting try, although it doesn't attack a piece, so unfortunately that isn't the correct move.
No.
D1.
G4.
Oh, yep, go ahead.
Rook to D1.
Yes, rook.
Yeah, D1.
Yeah,
Yeah.
rook to d1 is the correct move. The idea with rook to d1 is so similar to the. Oh, okay, I'll finish the puzzle. And
Yeah,
then
you
rook.
attack the king and the queen at the same time.
Right, that's correct. So now knight to c3, it forks the king and the queen, and now we can simply take the queen. So the idea here was we have to force the king to a certain square so that knight c3 works. Because in this position, if we play knight c3, then there's simply a queen trade, for example, and then we wouldn't be able to win any material. So we have to force the king to the d1 square so that when knight c3 comes, it comes with check so that we can pick up the queen. Okay. This is black to move.
Queen to D3.
Queen to d3, you're on the right track. It does attack the knight on b3. However, there is a more aggressive move that also attacks the undefended knight on b3.
Queen to
D1?
D1, yeah.
Yeah, queen d1 is correct. Idea with queen d1, attack the king, as well as the. Yep, Henderson, you got it right as well. As well as the knight on b3. So basically the king has to move, and then we can simply take the knight. Okay. One more. This is white to move.
Okay. Then
Knight to D5.
Knight d5, that is a great try. Knight d5 idea is to attack the queen and hit the bishop on c7. Only issue with that, there is a move such as queen to e1 check. And since the king is on the back rank, it wouldn't be checkmate because the queen can come back from a7, but then we wouldn't have a fork. So, but you're on the right track with the idea of knight to d5.
Okay, then knight to b5.
Knight to b5 is another great try, attacking the bishop here on c7, which is actually pinned as well. Only issue is you can take that with the queen, or you can take it with the pawn. Or as a third solution, you can also play queen e1 to force the queen back to g1.
So we want to keep the queen and we're not going to move the knight. basically?
So basically the solution does involve a knight move, although it might not necessarily be right now.
Okay, so it's the second move.
Maybe, potentially.
Rook to G7.
Rook g7 is interesting, putting pressure on this f7 point here. So if the rook moves, we can maybe take the pawn and then maybe take the bishop. However, rook g7 right now, it does lose this knight on c3.
Okay, this one's quite hard.
The
Queen
solution,
to c7.
queen takes c7. Queen takes c7 is the correct move. So this is kind of similar to the first one we did, where we played rook to d1, I believe, to play knight to c3. The board is flipped, which is why this is actually f6 instead. But the idea is we force the king to a certain square. So here we can play knight to d5, which forks the king and the queen. And once we take, we'll see we're actually up a knight here. So that's sort of that's the idea with some of these forks, is to force usually the king to a bad square so that our pieces can jump into another square so that we can attack the king as well as another piece at the same time. We'll do one more and then we'll move on. This is white to move.
Bishop to C5.
Bishop to c5 is a great try. Only issue is the queen's actually pinning the bishop to the king, so the king can actually move.
Queen to c6.
Queen to c6, that is covered by the pawn. Yeah.
Yes. Bishop to d5.
Bishop to d5. The d5 square is currently taken by the queen.
No, it's b5.
Oh, b5. Bishop to b5 is a good try, attacking the king. Only issue is we are only attacking the king, and black can play something like c6 to attack both the bishop as well as the queen. But you are on the right track with part of the answer.
Bishop to G5.
Bishop g5, that move unfortunately was impossible because this bishop can actually move, because then the queen would end up taking the king. So
Queen to b5.
yep, queen b5 is correct. So instead of bishop to b5, queen to b5 is the correct move. We're attacking the king, and the queen is also attacking the bishop here on b2. So once black blocks the check, because the king is of highest priority, then we can take the bishop, and we are in this position actually up a bishop, this bishop to be exact. So yes, so that's some review on the fork. Now we'll move on to our third tactic for the week, which is the skewer. I will share my screen in a moment. Right. Okay. All right. Okay. So the third tactic for the week is the skewer, as I mentioned. So I'll quickly go through what a skewer is. A skewer is kind of like the opposite of a pin. I'll set up a skewer really quickly to show. So this is an example of a skewer, and then we'll dissect it in a moment. We'll actually put the we'll put the king here. So this is like an example of a skewer. It's kind of like it's kind of like the opposite of a pin, pretty much. where we're attacking the king, and once the king moves, we can take the bishop behind it. And so the skewer, like I mentioned, is basically a tactic where we attack a piece, and once it moves out of the way, we can take a piece behind it. So in this sort of a scenario, we attack the king. Once the king moves, let's say to f5, we can play rook takes on e8, and this is an example of a skewer. So the skewer is often done against the king because, well, attacking a king is technically the most forcing move because it's with check, so the king has to move. Although it can also be done to other pieces, as I'll show in later examples. And similar to a pin, there are two types of skewers. One is relative and one is absolute. So a relative skewer is pretty much when we're attacking a piece. So let's say in this type of a scenario, so in this type of a scenario, this is an example of a relative skewer because we're attacking a piece rather than the king. So once the piece moves, for example, let's say to g5, and then we can take the bishop, just as an example. And a absolute skewer is what I showed earlier. So we'll replace the queen with the king. So this is an example of a absolute skewer because we're attacking the king, and then once the king moves, we'll take the bishop. And there are three pieces that can do a skewer, which are the rook, bishop, and queen. So this is an example of a rook skewer. And an example of a bishop skewer would be on a diagonal. So let's say something like that. Let's say something like this. This is an example of a skewer with a bishop. Basically, it's on a diagonal when two of our opponent's pieces are on a diagonal. This is an example of an absolute skewer with the bishop. Once the king moves, we can take the bishop. We can take the queen. Sorry, and it can also be done with the queen. So the queen, it can be done either with sort of a vertical skewer or a diagonal one on this diagonal, let's say. So just to demonstrate something like this. This is a skewer with the queen attacking the king. Once the king moves, we can take the rook. And that is examples of skewers. So I'll put up a couple of positions and we'll quickly see if you guys remember if these are relative or absolute. We'll start off with this. So for white, can anyone tell me what type of skewer this is, relative or absolute?
Absolute.
Oh, sorry.
Absolute.
Yep, absolute is correct. And the reason?
Because it's the king here.
Yes, so the king is on e5. This is an absolute skewer because we are attacking the king, and once the king moves, he can take the rook. We'll set up one more. Let's say the queen's here. Okay, put the kings on the board. Okay, for white, is this relative or absolute?
Relative,
Yep, reason?
because we're not attacking the king, we're attacking the piece.
Yep, that's correct. So this isn't the king, so once the bishop moves, let's say, we can take the knight, for example. This comes with check, but that's another example of a relative skewer. So now we'll take a look at a couple of skewer positions or examples. Okay. Okay, so just to illustrate, this is another example of an absolute skewer. Here we play the move bishop to d5, attacking the king, and the queen is behind it. So once the king moves to e3, let's say, then we can take the queen, and then after rook takes, you'll see we have a queen for and white has a rook, so this should be winning for black. I'll try another one. This one here. So this is white to move. This is an example of a relative skewer. What should white play?
Bishop to f3.
Yep, bishop f3 is correct. Idea being, we take advantage of the fact that the queen and the rook are on the same diagonal. And obviously we don't want to lose the queen. So let's say the queen moves to d7. Then we can take the rook. And queen and two pawns versus queen and two pawns should probably be a draw. But you'll notice that here, if we didn't find the skewer, then black would have a rook for a bishop, and then white would probably lose. So these types of tactics can also help save games. Third example we have here, these are a little bit more complex. So basically this is white to move. So both sides promote to a queen. And since both sides have a queen, it should be a draw, except in this scenario, white is actually winning. Reason being, we have queen to a8 check. And you'll see that the king, it can't go to b7 firstly, because it's covered by the queen. So once it goes to b6 or b5, you'll see that the king and the queen, after the next move, you'll see that the king and the queen here are on the same file. And we have a queen here that can give check to the king. And once it does, you'll see that once the king moves, this is an absolute skewer, we'll be able to win the queen on b1. So let's say king c6, then we can take the queen on b1. We have an extra queen, and this is very easily winning. Next one we have here. Okay, so this is white to move. King to c8 is the first move. And then both sides get a queen. But here, once again, we have a skewer tactic where we can play the move queen to a5 check, taking advantage of the fact that the king and the queen are on the same diagonal here. And once the king moves, we can simply take the queen, and this is winning for white again. So say the king moves off of this diagonal so that queen a5 next move doesn't come with check, because here if we promote, obviously we see the variation with queen a5. So let's say king to c2. Then this is a little bit of a technique here. Basically, we just have to stop the pawn from promoting. So sort of this is how we'll stop the pawn from promoting. We'll get into this on the third week at some point as well, I believe. So, yep. And then our fifth example. So in this situation, white to move again, we play this move queen to c4, forking the, in a sense, forking the king and the queen. And this is actually a queen sacrifice, but we actually get back the queen later. The idea here is that there is a pin here, stopping the pawn from promoting. And if we promote the pawn again, then obviously we have two queens versus one, and it should easily be winning. So here we distract the queen away from this pin. If you don't take, then we'll take the king. Then we'll take the queen on c3. Let's say here. Then we take the queen, and we're going to be up two queens. So if you take, the idea here is we can promote to a queen, and we skewer the king to the queen because they're both on the same diagonal. So this is sort of similar to the fork puzzles that we did at the beginning, where we force a piece to a bad square. In this case, forcing both of black's pieces on this diagonal, and then we make a queen so that it can skewer the king to the queen, and we can win back the queen. And this is easily winning. Okay, next example we have. This is sort of similar to the last example we saw. There's still a pin here, and we're trying to promote a pawn to b8. So here we distract the queen from pinning the pawn to the king. So obviously, if we move the king, then simply queen takes on h1, and then we promote another queen. If you take here, then the king and the queen once again lined up on the same file. So here we can promote to a queen or a rook if you want, doesn't really matter, both work. And then we are able to win the queen on the next move. Same situation. And rook or queen, same thing, you should be able to win the game. This is a even more tricky example. Basically, both sides are trying to promote queens. The issue here is that if we promote a queen first, although it looks like we promote the queen first, black can also promote a queen. And this is a skewer against white. So once white moves their king, if you block with the bishop, you're going to lose the bishop after queen takes, and then it would be a draw, which is why we can't promote immediately, because if you only have a bishop, you can't actually win the game, because that's an example of where there's insufficient material on the board. So here we play the very stunning move bishop to d4. The idea is we stop promotion currently. If you play king takes d4, then now we can promote to a queen. The reason being that this king will be lined up with this queen on the diagonal. Let's say you promote. Then after any king move, king g8, king f7, king h7, basically any king move, you'll see that this is a skewer. The king and queen are lined up on the same diagonal, and we should win the queen on a1 and go on to win the game. Similar concept again, we're forcing the king to a bad square. And if it doesn't take, then obviously we stop promotion, so we don't have to worry about that. And once we force the king to the bad square, we sort of exploit the fact that it's on a bad square by, in this case, doing a skewer by promoting the queen. And the final example we have, this is an example in a real game. We'll skip ahead to the end. So in this position, white here sacrifices a bishop. You'll see currently this is a skewer of the king to the queen. If the king moves, then we simply take the queen, and once black takes back, we have a queen for a bishop. And if black takes this bishop, then we have queen to c3 check, once again forcing the king to a bad square. And once the king moves, then we can simply take the queen. I would also like to point out when you're doing a skewer, if the king and the queen, so in this case, let's say it's the king and the queen. If the king and the queen are beside each other and we give a queen check here, then the king can simply move to beside the queen to sort of defend the skewer because, well, the king is still protecting the queen, so you won't actually lose it. But if the skewer is similar to what happened in the game where there's like a square in the middle per se, then especially on the diagonal, then you would end up losing the piece behind because you can't play king to f6 to defend the queen. And king to f6 is technically the only move where you can defend the queen, but that's controlled by this queen on c3. If it's on a file, so let's say a situation like this, then if there's a square in between, then we can play king to g6, king h8, king g8 to defend the queen. But on the file, if you have the king, if there's two squares in between, then now you would lose the piece behind. Let me move this bishop out of the way, actually. Something like this. Then you would end up losing the piece behind the king because the king is too far away to get back in time to protect the queen. So those are the 8 examples of skewers we have. So now we'll actually split into breakout rooms. We'll do a bit more practice for today. So I'll assign you guys to breakout rooms now.
Okay.
Yep, go ahead. If someone had a question.